So I have Egan, and you're gonna have to say your last name,
De Los Cobos.
De Los Cobos. I love it. On the show, and you are a firefighter.
Yes, firefighter paramedic.
Where?
In Santa Barbara County.
Oh, okay. You're local, sort of. I mean, California. What is your company called? First Wellness.
First Wellness Health.
Why First Wellness? And what's it all about? And who is Egan De Los Cobos?
Well, my First Wellness has kind of been birthed about from my story. So I was pretty much born and raised down in Central California, Santa Barbara County, and I started in the fire service back in 1999. I was 18 years old. It was my first semester of college. Didn't know what to do, and so I ended up reaching out to my uncle, who was a fireman for LA City. And so I knew I didn't want to keep going to school. Just being indoors was not my thing. I like surfing. I like being outside, being active. And I just knew that I needed to do something that was involved. And I've always enjoyed, obviously, helping those in need. That's just kind of been my personality. So I thought, what about firefighting or EMT? I didn't know anything about any of the fire service at all. It was something like I'd never thought of until I probably got my first semester of college, and I knew I just didn't want to go to college anymore. And so he told me to enroll in an EMT class. So I enrolled in a local EMT class at night school. I moved out of my house right when I was 18. And then the local fire department here is in the city of Salt Lake. It's a tiny little Danish community here in California.
Mm-hmm.
It was a paid call fire department at the time. And they hired me. I was 18 years old. And I just got started there. So I did an EMT class. I just fell in love with EMS and that whole role. It was probably the highest grade I've ever gotten in my life. And I remember I still got like a 97%. I'm like, I never got a 97 before in my life. So it was amazing. So I just took to it. So I started as a paid call firefighter there, and then EMT class. And then I got into paramedic school after about a year and a half. Went and did that, and then got hired full time on a local private ambulance company. And I did paid call firefighting since I was 18, and then worked for a private ambulance company as a paramedic. Well, first as an EMT for about a year, then a paramedic for 5 years. And then I got hired by the Santa Barbara County Fire Department, and that's currently where I'm at as well. And so I've been with the county fire department now for almost 17 years, and still a firefighter paramedic to this day. So guys always ask if I want to promote, and I just say, I'll never say never, but I don't think it's for me. I really enjoy what I'm doing, boots on the ground, putting the fire out. I just love it, and I can still do it. And that's where my heart is. About 5 years, 6 years into my career, I suffered an accident. So up until this accident that I sustained, I was always a healthy person. I never really had any medical problems, nothing really to speak of. I had occasional seasonal allergies, and all that got changed for me pretty much overnight. It was in October 3rd of 2013. My son, who was 3 years old at the time, we were sitting in front of a coffee shop, like a grocery store, and this coffee shop in the parking lot kind of comes around and faces, like when you come into the parking lot, it faces the store and wraps around. Anyways, my son and I, we always go there. So we were there sitting there, having just a little breakfast, and we were in this gazebo. So it's a table inside of this gazebo, so you're kind of contained. You can't really see in or out. You can only see directly in front of you, and you can't really see the parking lot. As we're sitting there, I hear engine like revving. And so I heard it, from what I can recall, I hear this engine revving. It's like the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. And it just crashed right through us. All it was basically like an explosion is what it looked like from my end. But I knew a
Holy
car had
shit.
hit us. I could hear it. And so we couldn't see it, but we heard it. And so I got thrown back. My son got thrown. And so I was on my back. I got up and I looked around, and there's a car that just crashed through where we're at. And I can't find my son. There's debris everywhere, fence everywhere. There's just stuff everywhere. And I just remembered in that moment that there was zero first responder in me, and it was 100% terrified parent. And so I started looking around for my son, and there's another people sitting there, started looking around, and I pulled off some debris, and I saw my son's legs and then his body laying face down, not moving, partially under the
Mm.
vehicle.
Holy shit.
And so in that moment, I'm thinking like my son was just killed. So as I reach down, I pick him up and he starts crying right away. So the best cry I've ever heard in my entire life. As first responders, we know like we like to hear screaming babies and crying babies. That means they're breathing. And so that gave me a little bit of relief. So I picked him up, held him tight, and when I stood up, I thought my legs were broken. They were in like excruciating pain, but I knew I had to get away from that vehicle because I had no obviously crashed in, so I don't know what's going on. So I knew I had to get him to safety. So I started walking, thinking I'm on broken legs, but I'm like, we're gonna find out if they're broken or not. So I
Yeah.
started walking, and I'm like, oh, good, they're not broken. So I got him away from the vehicle, and I remember when I was about to walk away that with my son, I remember the car door opened and the driver started getting out, and I just remembered this rage inside me of being so angry. But I'm like, okay, do I go? Do I
Yeah.
let this rage get me, or do I get my child to safety? Obviously, I went to get my child to safety, but I just remember that feeling of anger of somebody just almost took out my son and myself. And anyways, I sat back. So I remember sitting down, and it's ironic because I just actually talked to a friend of mine who was the engine company captain on the call the other day, and he actually filled me in on things that I haven't talked about in 10 years that I didn't even
Wow.
realize. And it's pretty incredible. Even it's been 10 years. Like he was replaying some of those things, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it still feels real to this day. Just incredible. And we'll get into more of that, I'm sure. But anyway, so I remember sitting on the curb and then just holding my son. He's crying the whole time. And as like first responders start coming, I remember the sheriff's department was coming in there, obviously fire engine coming in, ambulance. I don't even barely remember hearing them. I remember barely seeing them and then just being in utter shock, like psychological shock. I remember them coming up to me. And at first, my friend he thought I was just kind of helping. He thought I was there because it's this place I go to. And then it took him a second to see the blank gray look on my face to realize that I was the one involved. And so and I remember this too, was like physically not being able to speak. I just
Yeah.
could nod my head and like yes or no, and that was it. It was the weirdest feeling in the world to realize, like, to not be able to express myself or talk really in that moment. It was really weird, and that's part of it, is that helplessness feeling that you go through. And so we got loaded on the ambulance. I held my son the whole time. I remember the ambulance tried to put him on a pediatric board, and I said, "No, you're not going to do anything, and I'm not letting him go." And so, long story short, physical injuries were minor, and we were released
Wow.
from the hospital that day. So there's no other word to describe it except for a miracle that we're still alive. I have no idea how, because just the chair and tables were alone were a couple 100 pounds, and like fencing and like I can't tell you, there's just a miracle we're alive physically. And so we went to the hospital and then were released later that day. So I got some bumps and bruises. My son, the same thing. He had a bump on his head. They did CT scan. Everything was negative, and like I said, we were out of the hospital. So physical injuries were minimal, and that was it. So I remember even that day, and I've always been a positive person and see the bright side of everything. And like I feel like I've always had the mindset of like getting through. I can, kind of talk myself out of a bad mood or just like move on with everything. And I thought this
Mm-hmm.
was, oh man, I'm just so lucky. I just leaned into being grateful that I'm alive, and I thought that was going to carry me through, but apparently that did not. So that's kind of the beginning of my journey. So I remember after the accident, I had, let's see, it was like about 2 weeks to the day, roughly, I think it is, because I have a medical record still to prove it. But anyways, I started having bad like toe pain. So the middle toes on both of my feet were swelling, and they were almost the size of my big toes. And I'm like, what is going on? That's super weird. And so I went back to the doctor. They did an X-ray because I'm like, maybe I broke them. I didn't know in the accident.
Yeah.
I was wearing big boots, so it's kind of unlikely. But I looked at it and they scanned it and they said, no, there's no fractures or anything. But I'm like, they're painful and they're huge. So they had no answers for me. So, but that was the first sign of my autoimmune disease, psoriatic arthritis. So that was the very first sign that I had. However, that didn't come into, I didn't even know what was going on for my body for years later. But that was the first sign that I had something going on. And then I also knew that went through this, my son went through this traumatic accident. And so I'm like, well, it's, a life-threatening accident. Like I'm concerned for him. So I'm going to make an appointment for a therapist. So I went through my insurance, got a therapist, went down to see him, and he wanted to do was, first off, he told me that he thinks my son, since he was 3 years old, that kids are pretty resilient for this type of accident and everything. And he's like, he'll probably just fine. He doesn't really, I don't see the need for him. But he said, I'm concerned about you. And I'm like, well, I'm fine. I'm grateful. Like, he's not hurt. Like, we're good to go. I think I'll be totally fine. And so he said that, and that's obviously stuck. And then part of his therapy for me was, and this is my first interaction with any therapist ever. I've never had any kind of counseling. And so
what made you like pick up the phone and go see a therapist then?
That first time was simply for my son. I was concerned about him and his well-being. And so that's why I did it. I didn't think for 1 second for myself at all, because I'm like, physically I'm fine. Like, he's whole, I'm whole, like life's good. We went through something, but we're good. So that was the only reason why I went. And then the therapist gave me an assignment of basically writing a letter to my son as if he was killed in the accident. And I see the premise behind it now, part of like cognitive behavioral therapy and whatnot. But like at the time, and this should have been a clue, but you don't see clearly when you see red, but it made me so angry to want to do that. I just thought to myself, this is bullshit. Why would this guy want to make me walk through this event? And he's not dead. Why would I ever focus on him being dead when he's not? And so I didn't do that. It made me mad. I never went back to that therapist. And so I walked out the door and never went back to that therapist. I just wrote it off. Like, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. We're good. And that was within, I think, a couple months of my accident. So fast forward. So I started having that foot pain. And then over that whole first year after my accident, I started having plantar fasciitis, which anybody has had that. It's like walking on steak knives all day long. And so I started having these symptoms. I had the foot pain, and then that led to some hip pain, and everything was on my right side, which is kind of classic for psoriatic arthritis. It's usually on one side of your body. And so I started having hip pain, like so bad that my hip would like give out. I'd literally be walking, and I would almost fall over. I couldn't even pick up my son on some days because the pain was so excruciating. I felt like I was an 80-year-old man with arthritis all over my body and just super inflamed.
Did you work through that?
I worked through it for the most part, which was miserable. Even I'd have good days and bad days. That's how autoimmune works. And I'd be walking, like I'd be feeling pretty decent that day. And like guys would say, hey man, you got a hitch in your giddy up. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, dude, you're like leaning or limping. And I'm like, oh man, like you should have seen me yesterday. Like I could barely walk. But so that happened, and my hip would feel like it pinched, and it was all just inflammation in my body and attacking my joints, basically what was going on. And then so all that congruently happened. I started getting skin issues. So I started having psoriasis. I thought it was just dandruff that was going on in my hair. It started getting red, itchy, and the best way to describe it is almost like having poison oak. So anybody's done wildland firefighting knows what poison oak is, or poison ivy, and that's what it feels like to have psoriasis. It's just itchy, burning. It feels like your head's on fire or wherever it is affecting your body. So this was all going on from 2 weeks. Obviously, the pain started through over 4 years, and then
holy Jesus! Did you ever try to find out what was going on?
I tried. And so that's part of it. So the first time I got that x-ray about my toes, nothing was wrong. And then I started seeing my general practitioner about the pain. They referred me to an orthopedist because my hip was getting so bad. I did like a contrast CT, which is basically it's like a 12-inch needle in your hip. And then they blow it up like a baseball in there to see what's going on in there. And they're like, oh yeah, there's narrowing in there. I'm like, well, yeah, I could have told you that. And then they kept writing it off. Like I do have an anomaly on my hips. but it was only on one side and there wasn't enough. So it was all inflammation is what it was tied to, but they just wrote it off as osteoarthritis. So orthopedist said that, general practitioner said that, chiropractor said that, and then ended up seeing also a dermatologist for my skin, and they wrote it off as seborrheic dermatitis, kind of just general inflammation of the skin. And all the while, I'm piecing things together and asking numerous doctors. I'm like, hey, on this day, October 2nd, 2013, day before my accident, I never had any health problems. This accident happened, which was significant. Then I started having all these pain and health things
Right.
after. And not a single doctor was saying, yeah, that could be related to any of this. Not a single one put that together. And it made me feel like I was nuts. And
I can't
so,
imagine. I can't
and so,
imagine.
and so it just really frustrated me to the point of, and then I would even bring up, because my brother, so the way autoimmune works too, obviously a lot of times there's a genetic component too. And so just because you have the genes doesn't mean you're going to get it, just like lots of
Right.
things, but it is a predisposing factor. And I brought this up. I said, hey, my brother has psoriatic arthritis. Is there a chance that I do too? And all the doctors said no, and they weren't enough to even refer me to like a rheumatologist. And the way our psoriatic arthritis works is there's no still real test for it. It's not like you take a blood test and it's like, oh, you're positive. They just look off your signs and symptoms, and then there are inflammatory marker blood tests. So there are general ones like an ANA, a CRP test, just general inflammatory markers, and all those were completely negative. So I showed no signs of inflammation, even though
Hmm.
my body was like an 80-year-old man. That was even more frustrating, and that's exactly how autoimmune works because they just don't know where it's coming from. So there's a lot of frustration, misdiagnosis, and it's just kind of that realm of of the body because it's still something that's obviously being studied. They don't really know. Immune system is very complicated. So it's just a frustrating thing.
What's going on with like you and your family in during all this when you're trying to figure all this stuff out?
So
Like what is it? What does like home life look like you say you're
it's
normally a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, but what's going on?
so as I'm battling all this physical health stuff and frustration, obviously my emotional and mental health starts taking a toll. So now I'm concerned about financially, like what if I can't be a firefighter anymore? What if like I this arthritis gets so bad that I can't walk anymore? So that starts taking a toll on you mentally as well. I have all this physical stuff going on, and then I'm noticing my emotional health and mental health kind of going in a different direction, which isn't like me. There was one incident that sticks out in my head was because like two years after the accident, maybe a year and a half, my son was sitting on top of a high bar stool that we have, and he was, gosh, 4 years old at the time, and he fell off of it. And I remember like literally freaking out that he was like, I felt like he was like, oh my God, like his head got, cracked open or something. And he was totally fine. 4-year-olds fall. But in that moment, it felt like the worst thing. I remember just holding him, like squeezing him so tight that he got mad at me for squeezing him so tight. And that was obviously one of my signs and symptoms of PTSD
Yeah.
was that hypervigilance and then just getting taken right back into that moment. And it was the weirdest thing because in that moment, it just takes over you. It's an emotion. So that's why a good thing that I always tell myself too, like trauma isn't a memory. It comes back as an actual emotional, physical response is what it is. So,
Yep.
and that's exactly what happened to
Hit the
me.
nail on
And
the
so,
head. Yeah.
yeah, it's just weird. It's not just like I always thought of when I was learning about mental health a long time ago, paramedic school, like flashbacks. It's like, oh, just things pop in your head, but no, it's a physiological thing that changes your body chemistry and you feel it. And it was just incredible to start noticing those changes in my body. So that I remember that happened, and then just noticed myself getting like so mad about the littlest things that would just set me off. I remember like at a store, something didn't go right with like the manager, and I was so like angry that I felt like punching a wall or something, and that was not like me at all. I'm a very mellow, easygoing person, and I just remember just seeing red from like the easiest things and just being so angry, which was horrible. It just felt like I was losing control of my body. And so dealing with the physical health, home life is hard. So basically, things had to really like hit the wall, for lack of a better term. And that's kind of exactly kind of what happened. Somebody I was dating at the time, who's now become my wife. I remember we were hanging out at our house. I think we had a glass of champagne or something. And then I'm not sure, an argument ensued or something over probably nothing. And I remember physically taking a glass, not near her, but I remember taking the glass and throwing it against the wall and crashing it. And I remember breaking down in tears and crying right that moment, because I knew that wasn't me. That was not me right there. And I would never do anything like that. Something has got a control of me and I need to figure it the fuck out. And so that was the turning point for me to book a therapy appointment again and see, hey, what's going on? Because this is not me. And I'm like, maybe it's related to my health, or maybe it's the accident too. I don't know. Because PTSD was not even in my thought of that. My interpretation of PTSD was that's strictly for military. People who've been through war, seeing like, dismemberment, like shooting, like that's what I was thinking. That PTSD wasn't even a clue to me. So anyways, I made an appointment with a local therapist. And that's another thing too, is like, I knew I needed help, but I wasn't about to go to my department. I wasn't about to go to our EAP program or anything. I didn't want anyone to know about this. I was embarrassed. I'm like, what would somebody think? Would I not be able to be a firefighter anymore? So I didn't say anything. And so I've made lots of mistakes along the way. But that's how we learn. And that's why I share things, because I want others to not make the same mistakes that I did. So I found a local therapist who's amazing. And so I remember going to her office and kind of telling her kind of what's going on with my life, what's going on emotionally, physically, and also the accident, and told her my frustrations of having this and like everything's kind of deteriorating. And she straight out, like before I could get much stuff out, she was like, you got PTSD. I'm like, what? PTSD? And I'm like, that's just for like military. She's like, absolutely not. She's like, you had a life threat, feeling of helplessness, like it's a significant thing, and how it changes your brain and everything. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So getting that diagnosis was 100% like life changing. And at least it was kind of the first answer that I got of piecing things together. I always felt in my gut, in my heart, that something was wrong. But at least I got one little piece of the puzzle to kind of validate that maybe what I'm experiencing is real and it isn't just something that's made up. And so I underwent EMDR, and that was completely life-changing for me, and just incredible to like see how something as simple as it seems can help to kind of rewire our process that trauma. So through the EMDR is hard, obviously, but coming out the other side, it's amazing, because it's weird, because it's the best way I can describe it is it's kind of like carrying around a big old heavy box, right? It's just like a big awkward thing. It's constantly in your way, and it's constantly falling over, and it's just you're carrying around a box. That's all you can do. You can't put the stupid box down. And what I felt like EMDR did was help me kind of tape up that box and go ahead and put it up on a shelf and out of the way. It's still there. I can still access it, and it's still never going to go away, but it's not this weighing burden on myself. And it's more of a memory versus that physiological reaction as much as it is. It's still there, of course, but it allows you to kind of leave that there and understand that it's there, but you can kind of move in a more positive direction. And so EMDR was amazing for me. And I'm so thankful that I went through that process. And I know, and it's so amazing to hear that there's becoming more mental health resources for first responders and military. And there's a lot of nonprofits, which is amazing. And we actually have one in our county too, which is great. However, like I 100% paid for everything. I paid cash for everything. I didn't even pay my insurance. And it was worth every penny that I spent on it, so much more. So I think it's great, and it's just access. But I mean, I did it all on my own, navigating it, and I paid it out. I do it all over again out of my pocket to pay for it, because it was truly life-changing. So going through EMDR, getting and processing that trauma allowed me to let go. So I would always have this feeling, and like I just told you, I'd talk to the engine company captain, who's a friend who was on my call with me, and he said that over and over again when I was on that accident, he kept saying that I said, I thought he was dead. I thought he was dead. I would say that over and over and over again. And which is ironic because I never heard that till just the other day, but I always felt that. And that's something that EMDR helped to reframe for me. And this is how my brain processes it, or how I look at it now. So I had that constant feeling of seeing his body, lifeless body, laying in the ground face down. That was burned into my head. It's still there, but the basically the EMDR and therapy helped me reframe that. When I thinking of that thought, I have this new thought of my son tapping me on the shoulder, saying, "Dad, I'm here. Dad, I'm here. Dad, I'm here." So that's kind of how I process things now. I don't have that burning image of him and that feeling in my head. I have him tapping me on the shoulder saying, "Dad, I'm here. Dad, I'm here." And that's kind of the best way I can describe of that reframing of how it helped shift your mindset and that physiological reaction to subside that and make it feel like a more of a positive thing from a terrible thing, and then to allow you to move on with things. So that's something that has helped me to reframe that and think of it in a different light. So the EMDR was kind of that tipping point for me to want to go to start. Now I felt like I've processed something and I've got that answer that accident did have some sort of effect on me. And so that's when I started digging into what like autoimmune diseases, like immune function, and basically how to heal, because I wasn't getting the answers. So like it took me 4 years just to get an official diagnosis of psoriatic arthritis, even though I knew that was the case from like 2 to 4 years into my thing. I knew that was the case, but it took me almost 4 years to get an official diagnosis. And to me, it's kind of twofold too, because I'm kind of glad that I didn't, because I think I would have definitely relied on maybe medications potentially, because in that pain, which I'm not saying medications are bad. I'm paramedic for 22 years now, and I come from that Western medicine background. However, there's side effects, and we need to talk about those too. There's some significant things that can be caused from medications too. They're a good thing too.
No, what kind of medications? Are you talking about like psychiatric medications, or are you talking about the arthritis medications?
Arthritis medications,
Okay,
too.
got it. Okay.
So I never had to do. I just self-medicated for my psychiatric stuff, sadly.
Yeah.
In regards to that, like I've never been a big drinker or anything like that, but I did probably drink more than I normally would. Normally, I could go weeks without anything, and I probably had to drink, once a week or so, which is quite a bit for me. But what I did do, now it's funny, as we talk, my memory gets jogged too, is another side of that PTSD that I knew I had. Well, till after I didn't have it anymore, was I didn't know I had so much trouble sleeping. So I didn't have nightmares. I just didn't sleep. So it took me solid 4 hours to get to bed every night. Like I just thought my mind was racing. I'd constantly be thinking about my son, what he needed, and just stuff. So I just thought that was normal. And then to realize looking back, I'm like, no, it's not normal just to get like 5 hours, 4 hours of broken sleep all the time at home. At work, that happens, but like I was just constantly in that loop. And so I would force myself, and I would take NyQuil. I'd take NyQuil and ZQuil to go to sleep at night. And I knew that wasn't a good thing either. So that was something that I self-medicated with for sure. And it was simply just to get to sleep, because I knew I needed to sleep to function. And that's a whole nother ball of wax, because autoimmune, that's one of my triggers too for anything is like the lack of sleep. So it's a balance. So that was something that I treated. So when it comes to medications, and this is all looking back too, is just like I just felt in my gut that there was a trigger, a cause in my body. The more research that I did, that I felt that something was missing. And with all of my misdiagnosis that I had, I just don't feel like the doctors were giving me many answers or any solutions anyways. The only medication that actually was offered to me was just steroid cream for my skin. And that was kind of eye-opening for me. So I used it. It cleared up my skin for like, it works fast as a steroid. So it worked really fast. But then, within 5, 6 days later, it comes right back. So I'm like,
Right.
well, that's kind of odd, right? It's supposedly it's a skin thing, but it keeps coming back. It should solve the problem if it wasn't, but it's not. It's an immune health thing. It's your body attacking itself. And so many things in our cultural obviously are just we treat symptoms versus root cause.
Yep.
It's no different than like for a firefighting example, like basically that. So MDR kind of kicked off for me to be able to focus on my health. I started leaning into like gut health, gut healing. And, it's 70, 80% of our immune system is in our gut. It's
Mm-hmm.
our second brain, mind-gut connection, the vagus nerve, all those things that I was paying attention a little bit into in paramedic school. I'm like parasympathetic, sympathetic. I'm like, oh, this is kind of my wheelhouse. Like I understand this a little bit and it makes complete sense. There's several doctors now out there that are obviously talking about this, and we're just on the tipping point when it comes to understanding more, and it's barely being understood, this mind body gut connection. And like in regards to medical science, it's only been around since the really studies since the 90s, which is very early on and things too. So I dove into that, and then started implementing so like certain lifestyle changes. And I always felt like I was doing things healthy. I was exercising, I was eating pretty decently, I was trying to get as much sleep as I could. So I just started diving into all those things, supplementation, probiotics and prebiotics, and learning about all that stuff, and started implementing changes in my life. And so once I got my PTSD under control with the MDR, really dove into lifestyle changes and some supplementation. And I started implementing these changes and really focused, and I started noticing some changes. So it took probably about 4 to 6 months to notice some changes physically for myself. The first changes actually I noticed were my arthritis was starting to subside. So I was starting to have less hip pain, less achy joints, less stiffness too. And that's all part of it. And then, like I said, about 6 months in, I started noticing my skin starting to heal. I used to have psoriasis in my complete scalp, and now I just have little tiny patches here and there that pop up. But within about 6 months, it started to heal. And I'd say within a year, it was about 95% clear, and that's where I've stayed. So, like I was talking about, I went from the first couple of years to barely being able to walk some days, depending on the stiffness and the pain of my hip giving out. So now I'm 10 years later. So I'm about 6 years into my healing journey. So now I can run every day, run half marathons. That was one thing I left out too, was with my hip pain got so bad, they sent me to a specialist at UCLA, and I saw her twice. Just to backtrack, so that was through my whole journey, and that was kind of the tipping point for me to dive into my healing. So their suggestion to me was that my arthritis was bad, my pain was bad enough that they would want to do surgery. So what that surgery was they wanted to slice open my hip on the side, put my femur in traction, pull it apart, and then grind down my femur head and make space in there. So after she described that surgery to me, I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound cool at all. And I don't think, and she said it wasn't going to really, it'll buy me a few more years before I need a hip replacement, is what I was told. And so that's when I really took a look in the mirror and started diving into what holistic kind of things, natural things, what am I missing that I can do on my own, because I feel like I'm not getting it from Western medicine's
Yeah.
solutions currently.
What were
Yeah,
some of these changes that you made?
it's a whole host of things. So when I talk, and everyone's kind of, we're all similar, but we all have different needs and stuff too. So especially with
Yes.
autoimmune. So people with autoimmune. So the biggest thing when it comes to it, and it's all ties into, I think, mental health as well too, is basically you're forced to be self-aware 24/7 when it comes to your body and stuff. And I think that's kind of when mental health comes into play too, and mindfulness and all that. So you develop a self-awareness of where you're at and what your needs are. So the basicest things. So sleep is one of the biggest factors for myself. So for me personally, I need 8 hours of sleep, consistent good sleep at night. So because I wasn't getting that. But the problem is a lot of times you're not sleeping because you're in pain, or you're sleeping because you have anxiety, you're sleeping because you have
Right.
PTSD. So you got to fix those fundamental things, because just taking a sleeping pill, you may not be getting the right sleep too. A lot of times the sleeping pills allow you to fall asleep, but they don't allow you to stay asleep. So you got to kind of look at the underlying thing too. So that was something that I implemented. And the way I started doing that too was implementing things like meditation and mindfulness. So that allowed me to at least give me some tools, like going through breathing, engaging that parasympathetic nervous system to be able to relax my body. And that's something that's been huge to help me sleep at night too. Stress and sleep are probably my number one things that I have to focus on to be able to keep things under control. And they all kind of go into line. So I'm talking about stress reduction, so mindfulness, meditation, and just doing those things that allow you that too. So a lot of big things I always ask my clients too, and this is a common thing when it comes to PTSD, is what do you love to do? What is it that you do for yourself that allows you to 100% fully be aware and present in the moment? For me, it's surfing. So that's a big part of my life. And anybody who surfs knows that you have to be mindful. You have to be present in the moment,
Yes.
or you're gonna wipe out, and it's not going to be pretty. So that's one of those things that I stopped doing, and it's still challenging me for me to be able to do it. Sometimes still, I have 3 kids, a wife, and all kinds of stuff going on. But that's one of those things that I needed to lean into, as well as like running and stuff. I hate running. I despise it, but I do it, and I do it all the time because it allows me to get out of my head for a moment, focus on things, and then the physical benefits. So I always tell people, so I'm a surfer at heart. There's people who surf, and then there's surfers. I'm a surfer, and then there's runners, and there's people who run. I am a person who runs. So I'm not a runner, but I do it because
Yes, I know
I need to
exactly what you
be
mean. Yeah,
it. So
totally.
yes. So, and that's something I ask my clients too, is like, what do you like to do for you? And a lot of times I'm taken back because they'll say things like, wow, you know what? I haven't done my art anymore. I haven't done it for 3 years, or like, oh my gosh. And so implementing those things that allow you to be present and aware help to engage that parasympathetic. So just as you're aware too, like we have basically the best way I can simplify it. I'm a firefighter. So I'm not a doctor, so I need to keep things very simple. But sympathetic nervous system, right? That's our fight or flight, and that's kind of our gas pedal for our existence, right? And then we have the parasympathetic, which is like our brake, and we got to have that balance of both. So we need both. And a lot of people think too stress is a bad thing when we talk about it, and a lot of times we're talking about it in the bad way, but there's good stress, like eustress. We need eustress to do our job, to go to 911 calls, to get that excitement, to be able to be sharp and focused. It's when it's getting worn down and getting that distress is when we start getting out of balance. So the more things that we can do to engage that parasympathetic nervous system to keep things in balance, the better off we are.
So many people think that doing, something for themselves that they enjoy, like surfing or art or anything like that, is like a luxury that like they shouldn't be doing, because they should be doing the laundry or taking care of this thing or that thing, and not making time for that. Like so many people see that as a luxury, not a necessary for their health.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's exactly what I felt like too, because you do feel, especially your wife, kids, I still feel guilty sometimes like that. But my wife understands that I have to make time to do those things. And I try to do, and I do the same for her too. Like, I'm like, I got the kids now. You go do what you need to do. And it has to be a priority, because what happens is, so we sacrifice that, or your spouse will sacrifice that time. And then there might be a little bit angry or resentful. And then like, so would you rather have you be gone for an hour and come back in a way better mood and be good to go and be able to handle things in life, or not go, and then we're going to be, stressed out, or maybe getting into like fights that we shouldn't be just because we needed a little time. So it's kind of like in firefighting too. So I think about it a lot. Like when I was learning in the academy, it's like I would always say, like, take an extra second, figure it out, and do it
Right.
right, like pulling a hose line, right? So we don't want to just rush and it starts turning into spaghetti, and then you're tying in knots, right? You take a moment, getting your thoughts, do it the right way, and do it right the first time. And so you need that in life too, is just to know where to take a step back, realign things, and then kind of move forward too.
I like that analogy a lot. It's a very good one.
So that was so implementing those things. So stress is a huge one for me. Getting that good night's sleep and understanding how you work to be able to sleep at night is a big deal. So like relaxing your brain, and then obviously the basic things of screen time and like making sure your room's the right temperature. So those are little things to implement. Those are just nuances of it. We all need it too. But sleep, stress reduction, hydration is a really big one, and it's amazing. Like most people don't drink enough water to begin with. And so it's always, half of your body weight in ounces daily just to stay hydrated. Coffee, tea doesn't count. A lot of people have 3 cups of coffee in the morning and no water. And then I'm like, well, you're behind. You woke up dehydrated and now you're really dehydrated. So just focus on those things. And those are real, just hydration is such a big one that we take for granted. And when it comes to autoimmune or arthritis, that's a big one because obviously we need to be hydrated for our joints. And so that's always a big one too. And then caffeine can play a factor to that. Caffeine, nicotine, those are abundant in the fire service. We know that. And I'm never going to say, oh, don't do this, don't do that. I also, a common thing and I dislike is basically kind of making like fear mongering too. So a lot of people say, oh, don't ever do that. Don't ever eat that. Don't ever do that. It's like, that's not true. And that's not reality.
Right.
So, and a lot of, so that kind of parlays into diet too. So I hate the word diet. To me, that's a 4-letter word. I despise it. It's more, I think it's just the way we eat and the way we should eat is different on everybody. So, and there's lots of diets out there, right? There's, keto diet, paleo diet. There's the carnivore diet. There's endless amounts of diets. And so I don't cater to one diet specifically at all. I have 3 kids. I have a 13-year-old, a 5, and a 3-year-old. Yes, I'm going to have birthday cake. I'm going to have those things on occasion. Like I also coach people that have done, so when it comes to autoimmune disease, there's other diets that are a lot more restrictive, FODMAP diets, autoimmune protocol diets, and they're all good. All diets can be good depending on the person and what they are. But what happens is, and I've coached more than one person too, that it led to them being fearful of eating anything or doing anything because it was so restrictive. They just thought if they ventured out, that they were just so fearful, because when you have an autoimmune disease, you start feeling better, you're so scared to want to go back to how you feel because it's so flipping miserable. And so I've coached people to help them basically get off of some of those diets and those protocols that are being pushed down out there, and listening to your body and feeling what it is too. So just like everything, there's a general thing of what we should be eating, and there's things that we should kind of not eat as much. And it's just finding that balance of what it is and finding that what works for you. When it comes to gut health and gut healing, big proponent of our gut bacteria, right? We're more bacteria than we are human. We're about 10 times more bacteria. So it would behoove us to kind of listen to that and give those good bacteria what they need. And what good bacteria need are basically fiber. And so that's plants and fruits. So abundance of that. Protein's fine. We're meant to eat protein, whatever it is. If you don't want to eat meat, there's other stuff too. But obviously those kinds of things in a balance too. And I've talked a lot about like diet, and I actually made a video too. But anyways, so if you pull back all these diets that are out there, keto, paleo, carnivore, Atkins diet. So if you strip back all of it, there's like 5 common things that are missing. So or minimized, I should say. And it's like sugar, wheat, dairy, processed food, and seed oils. Those are the 5 things. If you put away all those diets, that almost all of them are either scaled back or missing to some degree. And those are the things that I just kind of moderate and understand that's what works for me too. So those are the things I just try to minimize, and I notice a huge difference. Do I still eat the stuff? Yes, I'm a normal human being. I'm not going to say, oh, you shouldn't eat that, because that creates fear. And just the stress alone has been documented to be just as detrimental as a not so good diet.
That's a good point. I never thought of that. Yeah.
And that's a real thing. So if you're stressed about everything that you're eating, that's just as detrimental as eating. So just understand that there's certain parameters and things that maybe you should watch and listening to your body, but developing that self-awareness of how it feels and how it makes you feel, you do that, or you readjust. And that's why a lot of this, there's no set formula for it too. There's a lot of the changes. We all know what those changes could be, but I just help to facilitate it in a faster way, because it took me years to figure out, and I can kind of streamline those things for my clients. And I love doing that too, because it's not like a quick Band-Aid fix or just treating the symptoms. It's treating underlying causes, treating those root causes to be able to lead a normal existence. Because when you have autoimmune, it's horrible to constantly worry about, oh, I got to stress out about what I can't eat there. I can't go out to that one. I can't go to this dinner date. And so there's so many factors to be able to help people to put some parameters and build their own self-awareness is huge, because that pays dividends forward for them too, because they're aware of themselves and they can pay that forward to other ones too. Like one of my clients, I love her story too, because she came to me scared in the beginning. She was starting having early arthritic symptoms, swollen joints, etc. She lived up in Canada, and the way their medical system works, she had 9 months till she could see a rheumatologist. So she had no answers for 9 months. And so she was tired of seeing, was scared that what would happen, because literally, if you go on Facebook or most places and you start Googling psoriatic arthritis, you see some really horrendous things that can happen, just deformities, disabilities, people in a wheelchair. It can be very, very bad thing. And so she reached out to me, and basically, and she had one of the marker tests is an ANA test. It's just a general inflammatory marker test. And she was positive for that. So she had an inflammatory marker that was up, and obviously those symptoms. So long story short, we did coaching for her about 4 months, and all along the way, and she wasn't looking to lose weight. She said that'd be okay, but had no focus. And that's what a lot of my clients, it's not the weight loss, it's the health on the other side. If weight loss is what you want, sure, that's part of it, but it's all about just being healthy and moving on with your life, and not about a number on the scale. So long story short, she lost over 50 pounds on top of it, which she was happy with. And then she took a blood test at the end of it and was negative. So she had no inflammatory marker sign. And that was awesome for me. But the most rewarding part was her daughter has some gastrointestinal problems. And then her husband, I didn't coach either one of them, but she was able to implement what she learned and what she learned from her self-awareness by implementing those diet lifestyle changes at home. Her daughter's symptoms were about 90% free. And then also her husband lost 60 pounds, I think,
Holy shit.
her changing on her things. So that was what I was like, that's the most rewarding thing ever, because she was able to pay it forward and learn. So I'm not here just to sell programs or anything like that. So I want people to actually feel better in their own skin and be able to pay that forward and move on, because that's what we should be all about. And that's something I've done since I was 18. I like helping people. I've done since I was born, like pretty much since I was a kid. I've always enjoyed that. And then being able to do this in coaching, because of the mistakes that I've made, to be able to implement to help others is huge and extremely rewarding. I've been paramedic for over 22 years roughly now, been a fire service 25 years. And as you know, like the job looks, in your eyes, it looks different the day you started, your first couple of years, than it does 10, 15 years into it.
Very different,
yeah. The way you picture things, the way you approach the job, and the fulfillment of the job as well, too. So we've all been there, compassion fatigue, burnout, and all those things can weigh on you. And by being able to do this coaching is a kind of reignited a passion of mine to be able to help somebody and not just put them on a gurney, take them to the hospital, drop them off at the hospital just to see them, in another week or two. So it's been able to fulfill something that I truly love and enjoy, and have made mistakes, but I'm able to help others and be able for them to avoid pitfalls that I made and move on in their life. So that health is a secondary thing to them. They don't have to worry about it every single day.
That's awesome. How is your PTSD now?
My symptoms are, I have control. So a lot of that, like obviously that self-awareness too, just like we were talking about, like if the emotions get struck, that's completely normal, and I'm okay with that. Another trigger for me when it comes to the PTSD is like loud engine sounds, rightfully so. I despise that sound. I don't like engines revving, but I know those things and I can work through it. I just don't like it. So, and I don't think that's ever going to go away, but I can work through it. It doesn't make me like it is not a debilitating thing too. If it happened, by 8 years ago, it would probably double me over. But I feel like my symptoms are good. Just like I said, like that memory of it is there and it's stored, and I can access that memory whenever I can, but it's not an overwhelming physical reaction that comes out too. And ironically, my son, who's now 13 and not 3, he got hit by a car a month ago.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so, and he's okay. That was totally fine. But ironically, he was crossing this crosswalk on his way to school, and a car hit the gas instead of the brake and actually hit him into the street, and little minor injuries. And obviously, that was bringing back some feelings of everything for sure, even if I didn't go through that too. But I was expecting more maybe from his end and everything, and obviously made therapy a point just to make sure we're all good. But I feel like that was a huge test to things, and I've been doing fine, and my son's been doing fine, and so no, that was it. But I was like, are you kidding me, kid? Like it's 2 times, like you're like a cat. Hopefully, I said no more. Don't do 3 times. And he's going to be driving in 3 years, so I hopefully it'll be
Oh
okay.
my gosh.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, how was he after getting hit in the crosswalk? Like, I'm just really curious, like as we get older and we store this stuff in our brains,
Mhm.
and they talk about how animals, are attacked by the lion or whatever, and they happen to get away, and they don't store this stuff like animals don't get PTSD because they don't store it like we do. Like they do things to get rid of all that energy and adrenaline and cortisol,
Mhm.
all the crap that stores up and makes it store in our body. So I'm really curious, when a 3-year-old goes through something like that, he doesn't have the same sense of, dying or anything like that, but still
Sure.
the noise and the craziness that went on.
Yeah, and so I obviously, from my conversations with my son, like pretty much everything that he knows is stuff that I've talked about and I've said. So that's a huge part of their memory. When we ask him about it, he doesn't really remember much, but except for a lot of the things that I've talked about and I've said too. So he doesn't have much recall of the event at all when he was 3 years old, for sure. So this last incident, obviously, I'm just cognizant of it and of any changes. And he's so far, well, obviously we're only a month or so, a couple months into it, but seems to be doing fine. But I have the tools, the awareness, and the resources
Right.
that I've already got in place to make sure that we don't go down that path again. And it's funny because I've still made, I've seen a therapist, and I've seen a therapist for my son previous to this too, just for family stuff. And it was interesting because, like, obviously I'm in this mental health realm. I do peer support, I do training, I have the health coaching, and it was still like not the easiest phone call for me to make, which is kind of interesting. Even though I'm in this realm, I still am like, oh, do I need to? Should I not? Like, and obviously I did and stuff. And I remember going back to when I first reached out, like that was the hardest call to make ever, because especially from us in a first responder role, we're not
Mm-hmm.
used to accepting help. We don't want
We don't
to,
ask for help ever.
we're there to help others, not ourselves. And we don't want
Exactly.
to ever burden anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the huge problem that can be involved with that, of just thinking that we can figure it out on our own. And we are very self-sufficient. We have a lot of tools, but we also need to know when to ask for help. I always go back to EMT class, or if you're a company officer, right? So you're going down your checklist of whatever it is, your body substance isolation, scene safety, all that stuff, or you're going through your sizing up your building. One of the last things you get to is what? Asking for help. So we
Yes.
do it all the time. We do it
Additional
at work.
resources. Yes.
Exactly. So you got multiple patients, you might want to ask for more help, right? If you got more, second alarm, ask for that second alarm. So we do it at work. So we don't think that we don't ask for help. We can't do it all. But in our own lives, we have a hard time doing that too. But takeaway that I got was once I did that, that obviously the best thing ever. And I'm so glad that I did that. But to tell anybody like that is the hardest part. Going through it and walking through doing EMDR, it's not easy, right? But I think that phone call was harder, was way harder than it was to go through
Absolutely.
the process.
How is your arthritis now?
Well, my arthritis is great. So I rarely have any pain whatsoever. And it's minimal at best, and it hasn't stopped me from being able to do any kind of physical activity
That's
for the
incredible.
better part of 6 years. And I was told, like when I went to UCLA, when they wanted to do that surgery, that basically I was going to be a candidate for hip surgery anyways, in like within 10 years. And I'm pretty much past that now, and I don't feel like it. Is it in my future? Maybe, but I don't feel like I don't have any pain, I don't have any symptoms, anything like that too. And so, no, my arthritis is, yeah, it's pretty much non-existent. The only thing that I do have is some skin things that are very small. But like I said, it's about 95% symptom free. And that's the thing with autoimmune. There's no cure, no matter what, whether it's
Right.
holistic, whether it's medication, there is no cure. And but like I'm okay with that, because it's almost like a barometer that I carry with me all the time of letting me know. And that's when I talk about that,
That's
having
so
that
true.
self-awareness.
Yes.
It tells me. So like if and by having that, and I think it kind of threw me into having more mindfulness of being aware of my own body, even more so than before I learned anything about like mindfulness and meditation and doing any of that too. So it's just this constant thing. If I feel a little more of my skin issues, or I feel like a little bit of stiffness, it's like, okay, what am I doing? What am I not doing? Oh, you know what? We had, 4 calls after midnight last night. I didn't sleep good the last night. Guess what I'm going to do today? I'm not going to work out. I'm going to relax. I'm going to do whatever. And I'm going to make sure I get a good night's sleep tonight, re-engage myself, and then be able to go back at 2. And that's, so those are kind of how I implement those changes in that, in blending that self-awareness. And something else I've just started kind of diving into in the last 6 months is heart rate variability. I've read it and got touched on it a little bit here and there, but heart variability, or HRV, heart rate variability, is basically, so we, like you and I could be both at 60 beats per minute, but we're going to have varying rates between there, but in the milliseconds. And so what that does is it shows the resilience of basically your energy level and how resilient you can be when it comes to stress. HRV is showing a balance between your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system, which is cool because that's exactly what we're going for too. So you can monitor it with just your iPhone or whatever phone you use. There's lots of devices out there, and it's kind of a metric over time. So it's not something that's kind of day dependent. It's kind of like an A1C. You want to do it over a projected amount of time, but it's an objective measurement of your balance of your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. And it's something that I've implemented, which is super cool. So it can tell you if you're like, I've woken up and I'm like, man, I feel tired, or I'm like, what's going on? And I could check and it's like, oh, it dipped down today. And it's like, oh, you didn't sleep so well. And so I'm like, okay, well, today I'm not going to do a good workout or a heavy workout. And then maybe the next day, like I feel pretty good. My HRV is within like a better range. It's like, okay, I can hit it hard. And athletes use this as well too, just to increase performance. If you're constantly just doing gnarly workouts or not, like tearing your body down, you're not going to be able to build anything bulk up. So they use this to basically kind of stair step their way to get up to better fitness level. I use it just to be able to make sure that I'm keeping my health where it should be and not falling back down because of my lack of sleep or poor diet or other things that may be going on in my life or stress. It can actually deteriorate your health very fast. And you don't need to do it, but it's just one of those metrics that's out there that's like I've been finding it super beneficial to implement for my clients as well as myself.
My God, I've learned so much from you. This is so
Mhm.
great. And just maybe one last thing that I would like you to kind of emphasize and kind of like bring home for people is, how much we all want. And I don't know if firefighters are worse than everybody else because we are so action oriented. We're so like, respond right now and take care of this. Like we're so black and white. We're so all or nothing. And just that whole wanting to fix something like right now. Give me a magic pill, give me a magic bullet.
Mhm.
And if you could just talk a little bit to, it sounds like you have not necessarily a lot of experience in this area, but just a lot of thought around it and everything of, of investing in yourself and taking the time. And there's so many people too that I talk to that are really struggling, and they're like, well, my insurance won't pay for it. And it's like, well, if you pay out of, like I did the same thing, I pay out of pocket for pretty much all my therapy. And I'm the kind of person who tears her rotator cuff at work and limps home and says, I did it at home so I don't have to, so I can go to good doctors and not put up with a workers' comp bullshit.
Sure.
And
Mm.
so just maybe talk a little bit about how important it is to understand that, like, really healing is not a quick fix and that it takes time. And if you can just speak a little bit to that, I'd be awesome.
Yeah, and that's a conversation I have every time with my clients. It is, and kind of a most recent one too is I had a client reached out to me and they listed there's a lot of these medications that are that affect your immune system that are super popular. Just turn on the TV channel, you'll see them that they're advertised for arthritis and other stuff. But anyways, he was on at least 8 of them. Like 4 of them I didn't even never knew about. He's tried every last one of them. And guess what? None of them worked. They worked for a few months and then they stopped working. So there's just so people are constantly looking for that silver bullet or that one thing that they're missing. And medications see has the allure of offering that, and they can help. Medications are fantastic if you need them. And another thing that I have clients do, so I have clients from all over the walk that don't want to take any medications, clients who want to stay on all their prescription medication, other ones want to take it and then get off. Like it's up to you. And I always tell my clients, like, any good doctor will want to do whatever it is that you want to do. If your goal is to get off medications, then any good doctor will allow you to do that. And you got to be an advocate for yourself, because no one's going to do that for you. And you ultimately are in control of your own health. And so there's always the people think like, oh, I'm just maybe a vitamin D deficiency, or there's one thing that I'm missing. And I'm going to tell you right now that 99% of the time it's not missing just one thing. So there's a whole host of different things, just like myself. So I thought I just had some sort of, I thought a probiotic was going to fix it. Supplementation, that's a real common one. People think I'm just going to supplement. You can't supplement yourself out of sleeping, or of only sleeping 4 hours at night. You're not going to be able to work out enough to eat your way out of a not so good diet. And so there's all these things that need to be in place. And it sounds like a lot, but it's actually a lot of simple things. And we already know how to do a lot of them too. So, and it's always like the pain of discipline versus the pain of regret. So, one weighs ounces, the other one weighs tons. And so just in implementing simple changes, and that's something that I do with my clients, is we focus on like little teeny tiny baby steps. So, and I'm not just going to regurgitate a ton of information onto somebody because it's worthless if they don't. So it's just literally like, this week we're going to do one thing, we're going to do this and implement this, and then we're going to build upon that, and then finding what works for that person too. And so it's listening to your body, developing that self-awareness, implementing those things that we probably know we should be doing, just just taking those little small wins and building upon that too. And the hardest part when it comes to all of that is that time and just allowing yourself to heal. And my client pointed this out to me. They're like, healing's not linear, is it? I'm like,
No, it's not. Yeah.
That's the best way to put it when it comes to mental health, when it comes to physical health, is it's totally not linear. Just like look at any big businesses that I've started, right? Like it's not like they just skyrocketed and went up. No, they filed bankruptcy a few times. They went down.
Right.
That's just normal way of life. We always think of when you see people on TV, it's like, oh man, they have all this success, but they have just as many problems and downfalls as we all do too. And so it's just taking those little things and not letting those little setbacks weigh you down and just building upon that. And you'll be over time. So it's a good correlation. I don't know who's just said it. So put it this way. So it's kind of like expecting you. So let's say you go to the gym and I'm going to work out for the next 20 hours. I'm just going to just really get after it. I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to work out for 20 hours. It's like, that's not going to do anything, right? But what if you went to the gym for 30 minutes every day for the next 40 days. That's 20 hours of working out. I think you're going to notice a lot more changes over that 40 days of working out 30 minutes every day than you would in 20 hours in one day. So that's
Absolutely.
when it comes to health, is it's just those little building blocks and just chipping away. And over time, implementing those things, then it becomes second nature, and you're not even thinking about it anymore, too. And like healing's not linear. You're going to go all over the place, but as long as you're going in that trajectory up, then you're going to go no place but where you want to go.
So great, man. And you help people with more than just arthritis, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the beauty of a lot of this is, I mean, it circumvents everything, whether you're
Mm-hmm.
wanting to like gain weight, lose weight, like that's a common thing too. And then stress is a big proponent of this, and it's incredible to see. And there's studies that finally have just come out that have been my kind of smoking gun. Is I just found a study on lupus correlated to PTSD triggering lupus among nurse population stuff. Like there's been a couple studies that
Wow.
have just come out, and I'm like, God, this is what I've been telling people. Like
Yeah.
this is a thing, and studies are finally starting to correlate this. That the propensity of developing autoimmune after the diagnosis of PTSD is more common, and they're actually putting science to it. And so we can either wait for science to kind of catch up, or we can, implement those things that we know that we should be doing, and just moving and taking health into our own corner and working on those things that we need to do. So like, because ultimately your health, you're in charge of your own health, not your doctors. It's never a bash on doctors. Obviously, I've been in Western medicine forever, but they don't all know everything. They definitely are not the expert on you. You know what you're feeling, and they're not going through what you are, and so you know what's best for you at the end of the day. You use everyone's information. Don't just listen to me or anyone else. You take bits and pieces and you make your own conclusions on do what's best for you.
And doctors are also like horribly like overworked and have too many patients and not enough time to listen, and they literally just seem to have time to like, okay, oh, you're feeling A, so that means I'm going to give you B, and they just throw something at you and go on to the next patient. It's really kind of sad. I mean, that's something I've noticed, that they don't have the time. They're just too many patients, and so yeah, you are absolutely right. You really have to take your own health and your own kind of what you got going on into your own hands. Well, Egan, dude, this has been amazing. Like, I'm so excited. I honestly was like, this guy just looks cool, and I like what he's throwing out there. I want to have him on my show, and I had no
Oh,
idea what to expect. And I'm really, really excited. I'm excited for people to hear you and what you have to say.
thank you so much for having me. No, I greatly appreciate it. No, it gets me excited just doing this stuff and putting it out there for other people, because I know what it feels like to be struggling. I know what it feels like to not want to ask for help and be in pain, physical pain, emotional pain, and in feeling basically kind of a dark cloud over you, and you don't feel like there's any answers, or you're not getting those answers, or there's feelings of hopelessness. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling to navigate on your own. And I'm so thankful for people like yourself that are putting this out there. And there's more resources popping up, and there's more and more help. And it's so amazing to see this slight change culturally in
Mm-hmm.
fire service and first responders that we're talking about this. And it's incredible that they're starting to have some conferences that I've been able to go to and see that there's like-minded people that are getting this out there. And statistics about, suicides, line of duty, it's just staggering that we do such little training in any of this stuff. It's just starting to change, but it's one of the number one ways that we die, and we need to do more about it, and things like this, your podcast. So thank you so much for doing this. This is the stuff that gets out there to people, to know that there are resources, there are help, there are other people like you that have gone through things and are willing to help.
Dude, you're the best. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Christy.